Angie and Stacy.
Are you gonna, or Olivia or Mark, are you guys gonna run through the agenda, or do you want us to do that?
I can run through the agenda if you would like me to. Yes, I didn't realize.
I would prefer that if you run the agenda.
Yep. That is perfect. Okay, so the agenda for today, this is going to be the agenda for the majority of the work groups, at least for the first meeting. So you guys are first come at the new agenda. So we should just start with some basic introductions. We're going to do a little brief discussion as to the subgroup work that's going to be expected of the subgroup. Then we're going to discuss what you guys would like to prioritize in terms of this subgroup, if there are particular topics or issues that you would like to be addressed in this subgroup. And then we would like to have everyone select a chair or co-chairs for this group who will be responsible for reporting everything back to the large group meetings and aiding the chairs of the large group to come up with the final recommendations. So why don't we start with introductions? Angie, Stacy, do you guys want to kick it off?
Sure.
No pressure.
Go ahead, Stace.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Stacy Bettison. I am a private criminal defense attorney, and I do other things as well as be a private criminal defense attorney. And I served on the CSC working group and a couple of different committees, and was one of the people that, as we were working through considering liability expansion on the CSC statute, we recognized that was going to have an impact on the registry. And so that's how that percolated up. And we, as you guys know, we proposed some language. I think we're going to discuss a little bit of that today. That's as a springboard for, at least the beginning discussion. And yeah, that's about it.
And I'm Angie Keys. I'm with the Attorney General's office. Been here a long time. Do a lot of work with registration, as I'm the main attorney who advises the BCA on registration. And then I also do sexually dangerous person cases, and I defend risk level assessments for the Department of Corrections. So I work with Mark and Brian when I do those cases. And I work with Katie and Olivia when I do registration cases.
Anyone?
And
I can jump in there if you want.
Actually,
Angie.
Chris, we haven't met Chris yet.
Yes, I'm a little late to join, but happy to be here. My name is Chris Nelson. I'm an attorney at Eckberg Lammers Law Firm in Stillwater. We focus in municipal law. We have 19 communities. We represent both civilly and criminally in the state of Minnesota, do prosecution work as well. And here in part representing the Minnesota Association of City Attorneys. So thanks for having me.
Do we have anyone else that is representing the Association of City Attorneys? Or Chris, are you the rep?
I believe I am the rep.
Okay,
yes.
Great.
All right, should I jump in now? I'm Brian Heinzone. I've been with the Department of Corrections for 23 years. For the past 17 years, I've been in the Risk Assessment Community Notification Unit. I supervise the 5 psychologists in our unit that write risk assessment recommendations for community notification purposes. I've been dealing with registration, community notification issues pretty much on a daily basis since 2004. So, good morning.
Let's go to Nicole.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning, everyone. Nicole Matthews. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. So we work with all the tribal advocates and advocates that are working with Native women in Minnesota. I've been here for almost 20 years, and prior to that, I was a sexual assault advocate in Mille Lacs County. So I'm very familiar with the importance of this issue and the registry, and also some of the harms that it's done to particularly young people on the registry. So good morning.
And Representative O'Neill. There should be an unmute.
There we go. Oh, yeah, I just had to hit it 3 times. Thanks. I'm Representative Marion O'Neill. I'm in my 5th term of the legislature. I've been on the Public Safety Committee since I first was elected 9 years ago. And I wrote Hannah's Law, which was the impetus for the CSC working group, and spent, I don't know how many hours, a lot of hours listening and participating in all the subgroups. I think except for one, because I only met once, of the CSC working group, and was the 2nd author in the House of the Republican lead on House File 707, which was the bill that became law and just was enacted a few days ago. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, and I think I had made a commitment to Stacy. I remember this, saying that I would see this through. And so here I am fulfilling my commitment to see this through.
I remember that moment.
And here I am. I am absolutely committed to, I've actually signed up for all the working groups so I can participate in here and bring this back to the legislature.
Okay. And Katrina.
Good morning, everyone. Katrina Dexter. I'm the Director of Juvenile Justice Reform here at the Department of Corrections. I also serve as the statewide JDI coordinator, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. So kids are my focus. I'm excited to be here today and good to see all of you.
Okay. Patty.
Hi, I'm Patty Wetterling. I've been doing this work since 1989, trying to build child safety. So I'm pretty much a child advocate, but in the last few years, I've received a lot of letters, calls, concerns about, well, mostly children on the registry, but in general, some of the challenges that we've created by having a registry. And I served on the National Center Board from 1991 until this past spring. So I've been working closely with them. I chaired a committee on children with problematic sexual behaviors. And so that's where we did a lot of research for the National Center, because they receive more calls on a daily basis to their hotline, and the police that they work with are looking for, what can we do besides arrest these kids? They're looking for broader options of how to turn their lives around. So that's been the work I've been doing the last 2 years.
Okay. And Katie.
Good morning, I'm Katie Myers. I think everyone's probably sick of hearing from me at this point, but I have been with the Bureau for, if we count my student worker days, since 1997, and then came back as an analyst. Majority of my time now has been spent in either the sex offender registration unit, because that's where I was a student worker at, and then came back as an analyst in the predatory offender registry, and then switched and worked homicide for about 8 to 10 years, and then took on the civilian role of supervising the predatory offender registry since 2012, tasked with supervising all of the staff that handles all the POR paperwork, all of the changes that come in, making determinations on registration, and training law enforcement on our systems, on the statute changes that come out of the legislature when that occurs. And happy to be with the group this morning.
Okay. What did you want to start with now?
Well, Ashley, would you introduce yourself?
Okay, and my name is Mark Bliven. I am one of the coordinators along with Olivia of this work group. I have been working in the area of risk assessment, community notification, and registration issues, working again very closely with Katie Myers, Angie Kisa, but also many prosecutors, law enforcement throughout the state. I've been doing this work for about 20 years.
And then I believe we have a couple of additional folks who have joined. So we have Ashley and Charlotte Ann, if you guys would mind introducing, oh, and Jennifer.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Stewart Griffith, and I'm with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. So I am just here as a member of the public. I just want to kind of know what's going on and working to let our members know to what's going on and how they can be involved in this work. So thank you all for the work that you do. I also was on the criminal sexual conduct statutory reform work group too. So happy to see that this work is happening. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Charlotte Ann, and I've been an advocate here in Minnesota for a few years. I am on the Crime Victim Board of Reparations, and I'm joining as a public member.
Okay. Go ahead.
Then I'll just say something. Jennifer Paulus is here. She is working with our IT on the web page process. So she also works with the civil commitment review process with the Department of Corrections.
And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Olivia Anderson. I'm the legal analyst, or one of the legal analysts at the BCA. I work closely with Katie on registration, as well as Angie and others. And then I do some legislative work for the BCA as well. So, so with that, we can get started on the agenda. I know that I had sent folks the information as to what the subgroup would be focusing on. If we want to kind of discuss the requirements, we absolutely can. But we did do the presentation on that last week. That is now posted, or the week before, that is now posted online if folks would like to see it again or need to see it again. And so with that all in mind, we wanted to kind of start off the discussion as to what some of the big issues are that folks would like to see addressed in this subgroup. And anyone can feel free to start. This is just an open discussion so that we can determine how best to use our time between now and mid-November.
So it seems to me, Stacy's muted, so I think she might want to speak. But I was gonna just say, I mean, it seems to me that the kind of two main things that have come up with respect to the offenses requiring registration have been the juvenile offenses and how they should or could be limited, and the same set of circumstances language, and whether that there should be any change to that aspect of the statute. Beyond that, Stacy, maybe you can say if there are other things that come to mind for you that you think are issues, or anybody else for that matter.
Right. So, so this is the requirements subgroup. And my understanding was that this subgroup is going to particularly look at the requirements that are placed on registrants, including juveniles. And we can look especially, we can, you know, pull out juveniles especially. But I think more broadly speaking, we're looking at the extension of the registration period. So
Stacy, I messed up because I was thinking of the crimes group.
Crimes, which is this afternoon, I think.
Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. I have my groups mixed up.
You're ahead of yourself. Save that for
Or
1
behind,
o'clock.
I'm
So
not sure.
excited, you just want to knock out the crimes discussion here.
Exactly.
Right.
Sorry
So-
about that.
Yeah, so I'll just friendly amendment on what Angie said is that this is the requirement subgroup and that we're considering what registrants are required to do in the broadest sense. And if there's a failure of what they're required to do, what that ends up triggering. So that's super big. But one way we started to look at it in the CSC group, and that discussion began, was to look at the extension of the registration period. So the baseline is 10 years that they're required to register. And there's a subdivision 6 in the statute has a section for the registration period. And when that registration period shifts or extends, what triggers that? And so I think that's a focus of this group, is looking at the extension of registration period and how that extends and why and for how long. And then as a second subject, we can look at collateral consequences that relate to the registration requirement. So the other things that are placed on them as having, by virtue of having to register, and we can look at the statute, we can dig in a little bit more. As a starting point, we did look at the registration period, and that this is subdivision 6. And so we came up with I think what the feeling was is like, someone's on the registry, their registration period starts, they get picked up for, I think this is kind of just a case and, an example case. They get picked up for something, let's just call it disorderly conduct. And they have a new offense, and that new offense requires that they be incarcerated. And now their registration period has extended another 10 years. So they might be in year 9 of their registration requirement, and they get picked up for something, and it might be minor, it might be big, but let's just take the minor case, for example. And now they've reset and they're on for another 10 years. And there's discussion about that as being an incredible burden and potentially very unrelated to whether having them serve another 10 years, having that registration period reset, is in line with the purpose of the statute. Everything gets back to, what are we trying to accomplish with the statute? What is the purpose? Why are we having people register? And is that registration reset appropriate? Is it fitting with what we're trying to achieve here? And so that's the concern. We came up with a proposed revision on the registration period, just one section. We just bit off a little small piece, and it took away that 10-year reset. It did have a continuation of the registration period, but it took away the 10 years. And I don't know if you guys have that language or that revision that we proposed in CSC. That's a first place to start.
Do you want to share that?
If we're ready to, it may be too in the weeds yet. But maybe we just talk concept, for a few minutes about, how people view that, or some other thoughts on it. I think from a practical standpoint, what we've heard and what we're seeing is that people end up being on the registry. Once you're on, it's hard to ever get off because of this 10-year period. And so it just starts to reset. And then I don't have the language in front of me right now, but there is I think you do get on for a lifetime if there's a higher level offense. I'd have to look at that. But I think the general concept is, what is the basis for the restart? And do we want to modify that? So it's more in keeping, you know, you have a person who is, we avoid this result of, you know, registrant is almost done with the registration period. They've been doing everything right. And then they get, you know, something happens and they're incarcerated. It's for incarceration due to a conviction for a new offense or a revocation of probation or revocation of supervised release. They have to do it for another 10 years. And that becomes it just becomes this, you know, forever thing. And is the forever registration, you know, registration in perpetuity, is that what we need? And can we do better? Can we find a way to limit that? That's the concept.
We just jump in with other related points at this point. So Stacy,
Sure.
in terms of the registration in perpetuity, not even talking about the 10-year time period, but we're talking about lifetime registration for a lot of folks too. Just first offense, first registration offense triggers lifetime registration for many guys, especially with criminal sexual conduct convictions, certain subdivisions of those convictions. I know I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but it's not necessarily a reoffense situation that triggers lifetime registration. So just discussion about that. And then relatedly, some process for ending that early, you know, coming off the registration, off the registry would be another point of discussion. I know that it's come up before.
Yeah, and I think, Brian, I think that we really tried hard to come up with these subgroups and bucket subject matters. And I think that how do you get off the registry? You know, or is there a mechanism to show, you know, compliance, you know, and good behavior and all that, and a way to petition to be removed from the registry? I think that might be covered by the methods subgroup. Doesn't mean we can't talk about it here because everything is so connected. We tried to bucket stuff, which is a little hard because everything is intertwined. And we can certainly talk about that here too.
And I'm going to be a part of the method subgroup as well. So I'll bring it up there too, wherever it fits. I'm sure there'll definitely be some crossover for sure. So yeah, sounds good.
So on the collateral consequences, Stacy, when you did your other group, was there some kind of survey, or do you know of some kind of survey of like the different statutes that are implicated? Like, for example, that 6265556 or whatever that came up in the Werlick case, or has that not really been done? I mean, I've seen it in, I think, memos or briefs or whatever, but I'm just curious if there's something that has that information.
I would have to dig in. That's a good question. I would have to dig in. We have done, there are 50 state surveys out there. But I don't know.
And I don't mean other states. I just mean other statutes in Minnesota that or other things in Minnesota that are affected.
Yeah, I mean I'm not aware of that, Angie. I wish there was, and maybe there is, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
Anyone else have some topics that they want to be sure we're touching on?
I was going to mention, if we're talking about collateral consequences as well, just the idea of residency restrictions being a big one. I know our unit compiles a list, and right now there's, I think, 90 cities or municipalities in some level that have some form of residency restriction. Some require or are subject only to level 3 offenders. Others are
Yeah.
any registrant at all, and those kinds of things, so.
The problem with that is that that's gonna be off of that's off of the statute, so I think that's gonna be beyond, it's kind of like the risk level notifications are kind of, I mean, I think that's beyond what we're supposed to be dealing with. I think more, I guess what I was talking about is when specific statutes are tied, like 243, 166 is cited in another statute for a basis for some kind of consequence. I don't know that we can do much with what local people do with their ordinances. Unless somebody knows something different.
So, and I was just thinking more in terms of just a collateral consequence that, you know, these places can, many communities, guys can't live based on their registration status. And it varies from community to community, as we know, some it's.
So just something that happens to them.
Yeah, really, for more of that, collateral consequence side of it,
So I have a really basic question. I just clarifying. So if you're on a registry, it's for a sexual offense. But if you get arrested for a DWI, that can trigger a 10-year extension for anything?
If
As
you
long
get
as you're convicted of it?
Yep, if you're incarcerated for it.
But that, you know, it's like if you have a friend who lost their license for 3 years because of drinking, but if she shoplifted, she wouldn't get a 3-year extension on her DWI. It's like it doesn't fit to me. The extension should be another sexual crime at least. I guess I don't understand how we get to do that.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues, I guess.
Well, the other thing
Anyone
is,
else?
does it help? You know, what I'm hearing from people, you have to give people hope to do the right things, some hope of something better. And these are people who don't always have everything going for them. And once it doesn't seem right that we add on, if they're not committing other sexual crimes, that shouldn't, it's not fair, really. I don't know, it doesn't seem right.
I realized we forgot to do the whole co-chair or the chair thing for the subcommittee. Were we supposed to address that, or is that later on the agenda?
You can do that now.
Is anybody interested in being chair of this committee? And Stacy, and when you guys did the last group, were the co-chairs also co-chairs of subcommittee or chairs of subcommittees, or was that kind of a separate, were those all separate? Oh, Stacy's muted.
All right, yeah. I don't recall that we had chairs for the subcommittees. We just had the facilitator, like the Mark and Olivia role. And it was more of just discussion. It wasn't a chair. That doesn't mean we can't have a chair here.
I mean, I'm fine either way. Does anybody have a preference? Is anybody particularly interested in doing that here?
Don't all rush to it, guys. Okay, we can go without.
I mean,
for the work group.
For now we can, you know, I think it's more just, you know, as you know, Angie, as you and I, as co-chairs of the larger group, you know, we're working with Mark and Olivia to kind of make sure we have an agenda and we know what we're doing in these meetings, so that there's some sort of direction. I mean, I'm you know, I'm happy to continue to serve in that, you know, that way, and it's kind of a default chair of the subgroup.
Okay.
And the big thing is to report out to the large group, is to make sure that somebody is speaking
Okay.
for the subgroup.
Okay, and with that in mind, we wanted to also discuss schedules. So this subgroup is scheduled to meet every Monday from 9 to 11. Obviously, that'll change depending upon what the topics are. We may end early. We may, change up the schedule depending upon folks would like to talk through. But is that a time and, is that something that folks are comfortable with, at least holding that Monday 9 to 11 for now? And we can always change it based on schedules. We can always modify it. Our hope is that the majority of the work will be done before the holidays pick up, because we know that folks' availability will drop off with the holidays, as it should. So again, we can always remove meetings, we can always add meetings if folks want to continue a conversation, those kinds of things, that's totally fine. We just want to be sure that the public knows when things are going to be held and that they are able to participate and provide public commentary. I'm seeing a bunch of nods, so I'm taking that as a yup. Okay. So in terms of the next meeting, it seems like the two big topics that folks would really like to chat through are the failure to register extension, and then also collateral consequences of all of that. So are folks comfortable talking through the language as it currently sits and providing feedback on that during the next meeting?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, and I can display the language and we can chat through it all and I can mess with it as we go along. But it sounds like that really is a topic that everybody on the working group would like to chat through. Okay. All right. We're so speedy today. Okay. So with that
can I
in
ask a
mind,
question? Is this weekly? Is this a weekly or is
Yes.
it every, okay.
this is weekly. And then my understanding is that the large group meeting is every other week to check in.
Yep.
Okay. Wow. Thanks, guys. I will chat with you later.
Well,
So are you gonna send out that language, or did you want to look at that language now?
I'll send out the language and folks can look at it over the next week or so. Folks can provide feedback to us via email if they choose to, or just with any comments, as we usually have our emails open for all of that. And then I can also plan on displaying it and we can walk through folks' feedback or any changes that they want to see, the implications that they see, and use that as a base for discussion if that works.
And if you could also send out I don't know if it sounds like you're gonna send out like subdivision 6.
Yep, I am going to resend out, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if you're sending it out in portion, I don't know if you're gonna send out the whole thing, but if you're sending it out in portions, maybe include the portion that sets the 10 years of the lifetime that shows the offenses that trigger lifetime.
Yep, so I was planning on sending out the entire section and then highlighting the relevant pieces that we'll be walking through. I think that they'll all implicate one another and kind of turn into crossover if that works for folks. And then I do know that I will also resend out the CSC working group report because I know that there are some changes in there that Stacy and others have referred to in the chat, so that we can be sure that everybody is kind of aware of that background as well. And then I know yes.
And that working group proposal is on the web page from that first meeting. So
okay, good.
You can look at it there also.
And then public commentary, if there is any public, I'm not sure. Mark, you want to lead this bit?
Yeah. So were there any comments from from Charlotte Ann, Ashley, or others not on the working group? You can raise your hand if you would, under the reactions.
It looks like Katrina has her hand raised too.
Let's.
I was gonna patiently wait until after public commentary. I just was hopeful that somebody could send a list of the most recent requirements for what needs to actually be imported when somebody is registering. I know it was in the PowerPoint, but it was in a timeline format. And so I want to make sure I'm looking at what is most up to date and accurate. And I thought maybe the rest of the group might want to see that as well.
So you mean like what has to be reported, like their addresses, their car registrations, things like that?
Yep.
Katie, do you have a good list of that somewhere, or a good?
Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have a good list, Angie, but pulling up subdivision 4A clearly calls out all of those items that are required to be provided in numerical order 1 through 8. So very easy to read and follow.
So
And I can-
Olivia, maybe when you send that out, you could highlight that too.
Yes, I will highlight that as well as the failure to register extension language, those kinds of things, just to be sure that folks are aware of them.
Perfect, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, anything else from public members or viewers? Oh, I see Ashley.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I was happy to hear some talk about the residency restrictions and the levels, and maybe that isn't, the purview of this group, but I know I've heard from some members, I've heard them say like things like, the registry is one thing, but the residency restrictions are, really impacting families and people who are on, who have caused harm and who are, and maybe trying to repair that harm. So I know, like I said, maybe it's not in the purview of this group, but if it's something we can be really conscious of and kind of work in tandem with, I was just really glad that that was brought up and considered. So thank you.
Hey, Ashley, I have a question before you go away. When you say you've heard from members, do you mean members of the working group?
No, I mean from some Mincasa members. I want to be clear, we have very diverse opinions about everything, but that is one thing that I've heard from some members.
And when you say you've heard from them, I know the residency requirements are not, we don't have control of that. That's really a local thing, and it's level, deals with the levels. But are you hearing that and you said, people are trying to make reparations, and sometimes these things prevent the reparations, or can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we know that when people are welcomed into a community, that they are less likely to reoffend. If somebody's getting their needs met and feel like I said, that they are welcome in a community, feel like they can be contributing members versus being, told you can't come here, you can only live in these places. It can, cause somebody to perhaps reoffend or maybe cause different types of harm. So that is just something that, I think we're really recognizing that people need community in order to be supported in their efforts to, repair harm.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Ashley. And I've heard of a recent situation where a level 3 was moved back into the community in which the offense took place, and it's a it's a real suburban, heavily families and lots of kids, and that town did not have a residency restriction, and so there was some real community panic about having this person just fully integrate in. So I think it goes both ways. It's a tricky one because depending on who the registrant is, it's such a specific, case specific thing. I've also heard from registrants who, aren't, maybe they're classified as level 1 or unclassified, but they're super nervous about even, like I had a registrant who was, on a run, doing his, running regimen, and he didn't want to go into this park and get a drink of water. He was afraid that if he was going to be in the park, getting a drink of water, I mean, he was very afraid. He was very nervous and very anxious about that. And his crime had nothing to do with a minor or an age difference. But he ends up just kind of steering away from these places that he actually has every right to be in, just like you and I. And so it is a very complicated, analysis, I guess.
Representative O'Neill.
I was just going to let you know that this is a conversation we've had multiple times at the legislature about the state actually stopping cities from being able to do residency restrictions. So I know somebody had mentioned, well, there's nothing we can do about that. And I would offer that you could relay this conversation to the legislature in the report that this is a big impediment. And what we have found when we've had entire hearings about this at the legislature is we have certain cities that don't have the restrictions. And so now you have a high concentration of registrants in that location, which also is not helpful. So there's a multitude of issues, and I would encourage us to have those conversations here. And, if we feel that that is a recommendation to the state, because the state could prohibit that practice of having residency restrictions. So I would encourage you to have this conversation. We have had it at the legislature. We have had it multiple times over multiple years. And so we certainly are open to listening to that.
Hey, Nicole.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just gonna add to that conversation and just say, I think that's another reason why it's so important to look at, how long people are on the registry, like when do we, when and if people can come off the registry, like how does that happen when people have actually done the work to make changes in their life? Do they come off? Because I have seen so many times how people who have really worked hard to try and change their lives or do something better are really demonized when they are on the registry, and our communities are fearful, and I completely understand, but I think there has to be an avenue and a way for people to come off if they are doing the work to repair the harm and to change their life. So.
Okay. Was there anything else?
Are we feeling like we might be to the completion of the meeting? Did I hear Olivia say that she's going to send stuff out? We'll look at it and then we'll reconvene. Is that what I heard correctly?
Yes, or we can continue chatting. It's totally up to the group as to what would be most beneficial for them at this point.
Well, I think I'd like to just throw out this concept of, what Patty had raised, which was, is the restart for a registered offense, or is it for a DUI, or is it for a disorderly, or is it for any other number of minor offenses? Well, we'll just say offenses that get you incarcerated, you know, even for a few days, right? It would seem to re-trigger that 10-year period. You know, one way, when we did the revision of that registration period, we didn't look at the offenses that would, you know, if you're incarcerated due to an offense, we didn't look at the offenses, you know, and that's maybe one way to look at it, Patty, is to say, just looking at the statute, subdivision 6, which is our registration period, the time. If a person required to register under this section is incarcerated due to a conviction, I guess it's a conviction for a new offense or other revocation of probation, that sort of thing. You know, maybe there's a way to say, you know, maybe we just bat around the idea for a little bit and see how people feel about if a person is required to register under this section is incarcerated due to a conviction for a registerable offense. You know, maybe that's how we avoid the disorderlies and that sort of thing, so that, you know, yeah, if you're convicted for another registerable offense, you know, well, that has at least a little bit more nexus, right?
Well, that right now has a lifetime anyway, right? Doesn't it, Katie?
Yeah, let me look.
Yeah, it's a lifetime if you get a second registration.
Can I
Under
just add,
under 1B, yeah.
can I just add something? Stacy, that was so back in 2000, when the restarting of registration periods began, that was what it required, was it needed to be, you know, a new CSC offense or a violation of the offense requiring registration. So that was from 2000 to 2005. And then it became basically the any offense, you know, still requiring a conviction. And the time had to be served subsequent to the conviction. And then in 2014, it was still any offense and credit for time served counted. But yes, Angie is right that any registration offense for somebody currently registering would trigger lifetime, because it's that repeat offender basically.
And that's subdivision, and you're right, that's subdivision D.
And I'm not saying that that means that from a policy standpoint, it doesn't make sense to look at these extensions. I'm just saying that that particular language is already kind of accounted for in the lifetime registration. So I think it maybe more would be looking at, yeah, I mean, what to count for extensions, if anything. So
I'd just be interested to hear how other people feel about this restart for any incarcerated due to a conviction for a new offense or revocation of probation or supervised release or conditional release.
Well, and one thing that would be different is if you tied the revocation to registered offenses, because that wouldn't necessarily be you know what I mean? That wouldn't be a conviction. So then it would be extended if there was revocation on the registration offense. But you know, so that's one thing that would be different.
So a number of folks have raised their hands. I believe Patty, you were first.
Well, I don't need to be first, but my thought is, I thought registration was built to build community safety. And to me, it feels like this is punishment, not there. Where is the research knowledge base that extending somebody repeatedly makes a community safer? Safer. I'm not sure that exists, but it should. If we don't have that, you know, it just philosophically, it doesn't make sense to me that we just keep extending registry when we really don't have the research to prove that it has the prevention aspect. It's incredibly costly, and it would seem like we could better serve by putting resources into programs so that these people can succeed in other ways. I think there's some creative things around the country, I know, especially for juveniles. So that's my thought. Is it punitive? Is that what we're trying to do here, is just keep punishing these guys because these crimes are horrible? Or are we really truly trying to build community safety? And that's, I think, a question that we I don't know that we can answer at this point, but I just had to ask.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you. I just have a quick clarification question. I know it's mentioned several times that the registry is just for sex offenses, but as I recall, looking through everything, it's also including crimes of violence, which has nothing to do with sex crimes. And so I know we've expanded this predatory offender list so wide that it feels more like anybody that committed any crime against a person as opposed to a sex crime. Or, you know, I know that we'll discuss this more in the crimes subgroup, but I think we need to be clear what we're talking about when we're talking about first the initial offense that puts you on it, which is, I believe it's all the crimes of violence, not just the sex crimes. But then, you know, like we've been discussing the additional 10 years if you violate things that have nothing to do with any sex crime. But am I correct in saying that it's also all the crimes of violence, not just sex crimes?
No, well, so under 243-166, it's primarily sex crimes, but includes also kidnapping and false imprisonment. But then under 243-167, which ropes in the crimes against the person in certain circumstances, like if they didn't register the first time, or if they had completed registering, then a crime against the person would trigger registration. And the extensions for the revocations or the new convictions, those would include a crime against the person, but the initial registration, they're all sex or sex related except for kidnapping and false imprisonment on 243-166. I think, Katie, am I missing anything? There's like surreptitious intrusion, but I think that's sex related.
Yep, the false imprisonment and the kidnapping are the two that come to my mind that are not your CSCs or sex-related crimes. Because even the murder first degree has that clause 2, which requires the sexual element to it.
Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to actually illustrate a case briefly, just that talks about both of these things that I was thinking of recently. You have somebody who just recently came to prison for the first time. They were convicted at age 16 of a false imprisonment offense in like mid 2000s. So required to register, certified as an adult. Then I think registration was extended for some other crimes or other things throughout those years. Now is in prison on a second degree burglary, nothing to do with sex or violence, and registration will be extended 10 years, be required to register until 2032 and be assigned a risk level from a non-sex related false imprisonment when he was a teenager in 2005. So just kind of, there's a lot of those stories out there, but focusing on one specific example, kind of what we're talking about, maybe some of the problems we're hoping to change. So.
And Brian, do you know how long this person that you're talking about, how long he has now been on the registry since the age of 16? Like where is he in time now?
So, well, since 2005, I think. So 16 years. And so now another 10 will be added on. So that'll be 26 years.
For something that happened when he was 16.
And then again, assuming there's no revocations or additional things subsequent to that. Yeah, but there's been no sex related history at all. And then the initial registration crime was, non-sex related.
Okay, Nicole. We'll get you unmuted there.
Okay, thank you. This was probably talked about when we talked about the history of the statute changes, but why was it changed to include all offenses for the extension? Is there, do we know why?
I can look at the legislative incentive for it and try and listen to some previous testimony, but I don't know off the bat. It was expanded over time. I'm not necessarily sure what the incentive was that year to keep it or expand it, but I can look that up and provide information back to the group if that would be helpful.
That would be helpful to know that.
Sounds good. I will take care of that.
In some of the cases, they've talked about the legislature intending for somebody to be 10 years offense free in the community. But I don't know that it would be better to see if there was specific like testimony or that clarifies that more. But that's the only thing I've really seen about that in court decisions where they've said that, where somebody's been required to register when they didn't know about their obligation earlier.
Yes, I can pull that information and send it out to the group or bring it up to folks to have a listen during our next meeting.
Okay. Katrina, next.
I'm just wondering if this is an area where we have data limitations or if there is any ability to pull any data on this. I know it might be harder on the registry side of things, but if there is anything in regards to revocations or anything that we could get potentially on the probation side.
So in terms of, with regards to the registry, we don't keep a lot of that data because we simply need to know where somebody is right now in order to meet the registration requirements. So we would not necessarily track all of that or somebody's criminal history, those kinds of things, just because that wasn't the purpose or the intention behind the registry to begin with. I can't speak for DOC.
So Katrina, to your question, I did a data request, which Katie knows about, and provided me a number. I did a data request that requested the following: the number of people whose registry time period, 10 years, has been extended beyond the original 10 years due to either a failure to register or charged or convicted of another non-registerable crime.
Yeah. So we can pull the number of resets. We can't necessarily break apart why. And
I'd like to speak to that request just as well. In the most recent requests that were sent out, I think Stacy had submitted the first one that had multiple, and we're still looking through that. Realizing that our system gets updated consistently, okay? There was a period of time where we have gone, in my time here, we've gone through 3 systems. I don't know with certainty that the number that you have now in front of you, Stacy, is completely accurate, because what we discovered when going through this with a database administrator, so they're going into a database trying to pull data that, technically registrants, if they're incarcerated, their 10 years begins the day they walk out. So any query that would have looked at that could have provided false positives, as well as anybody that was on the registry on October 21st of 2014, when we moved from the system that money was provided for when Katie Poyer was taken. Every one of those individuals got a second entry. So it would appear as though their registration periods restarted. So I'm going to say right now, I don't know, I wouldn't provide that number again today after going through the data request again with an administrator.
Yeah, and I think that points to an important issue, which is the data. The data is only as good as we're tracking the data, right?
Yeah.
Right, and Stacey, the hard thing is like I said, we can make any changes. I know the group had talked about the other day, like, oh, well, we can identify the information that we want the registry to store. That's great, but I hope everybody thinks and keeps in mind that is only going to be good from the day that gets enacted, because we can't go back. And that's the problem too, is that we never go back on a completed offender, anybody that's not currently required to register that we're actively touching their files, they're going to get none of those updates. So Those are tough goes for us as a staff of 7-8 people with, 18,000 active and a couple thousand inactive offenders. So.
Right. I do remember that I'll just say this one last thing. I do remember the number that came back from their request. And again, it was the number of people whose registry time of 10 years had been extended beyond the original 10 years due to both my request was both a failure to register or charged or convicted of another non-registerable offense. It was 12,000 plus. This was like a year and a half ago. I think I got that number, or a year ago, Katie, that you sent over that number. So at the time, that was over half of the registrants had been reset for 10 years for either failure or charged or convicted. Not, it wouldn't have been charged, it would have been, had to have been convicted and incarcerated for.
Right,
a
and what I'm
non-registrable
saying
offense.
is that in looking at this now, again, we can see that there's system updates. The way that the dates are set initially, that number is probably, the number you have is probably, it's been inflated because of looking at system updates that made it look like people in 2014 got restarted and they didn't really get restarted because of the system putting in that line item. So I don't know that it's truly 12,000 anymore of the 30,000 that we've ever had through here.
Is that something that you can get better data on at this point or not? And the other question I have is, if you have an offender who, like I have a guy right now who's been extended like 10 times. So does he count as one or does he count as 10 when you look at that data?
I don't know.
I think we're bumping into the same issue though of pulling data for which the predatory offender registry was not intended to pull. That is not what this registry was ever intended to do. The registry was intended to find somebody where they're at right now for law enforcement investigation purposes. So,
Right.
And the items that are called out in 4B, we can provide you, we have those. I mean, we can't tell you where everybody is living and working like specific, but if you made the request of, race, gender, age, city, county, those kind of things, working, school, anything, those things we can provide because that's what the legislature said we had to track. But now what we're basically being asked to do is pull a needle out of a haystack. We track, we reset a date. We can't go back and necessarily say how many people because of these system updates and because of not going back and filling in information on a completed offender. Things just, it's a number that was provided and I don't know, again, if it'll be done again. Not in the current system, most likely.
Abby.
I have a question. What does it mean? You have a couple thousand that are inactive. I don't know what that means.
So an offender who leaves the state, in 2005, the legislature put in that the Bureau would inactivate a file, meaning just their time continues to run, but once through one-time verification process, if we send them a verification letter, they confirm that out-of-state address, so they no longer are living, working, or attending school in Minnesota, we would suspend or inactivate their registration here. The time continues to run. If they come back before the registration period is up, they'd continue to finish off that registration period. And then register in the state if they're required to register in the state they're going to. It's up to that state's law, though, whether registration would apply there.
But if their time expires,
their time, yeah, we'd review them like any other offender if their time expires while they're gone, Patty.
That's good clarifying.
Oh,
thank you.
Sorry.
Do you know,
Yep.
do you know, Katie, offhand, how many files you guys have that are completed versus inactive?
Yeah, give me just a second here and I can get you that fairly quickly.
yeah, we'll circle back with that number as soon as Katie can pull it. If folks want to keep chatting, go ahead.
I don't have anybody requesting.
No pressure, Katie.
And that,
Oh,
oh,
August
I was gonna say
1st
that's-
is going to be my pull date for you. It will be August 1st. And at that time we had as of August 1st, oh, actually I've got June 1st, sorry, 9,664 offenders that had been completed.
And then deactivated, I think.
Oh, and inactivated, sorry. On that date, there was 2,793 inactive offenders.
So is that in the history of the registry?
Yeah.
I've got nothing else.
Okay.
So do we just
All right.
kind of look at everything that gets sent out and then regroup next week once everyone's had a chance to look at the language?
Yep, and we'll plan on displaying the language and folks can walk through it, provide commentary on whatever they would choose to discuss. Most of these meetings, I'm gonna be really honest, are going to be just discussion, providing changes as folks see fit. You know, these are really intended to do a good chunk of the work associated with each one of these topics. So at least that's what I've heard from the chairs. Chairs, please let me know if there's something different that you'd like to say, but so yeah.
So, yeah, and I think the last thing I would say is, you know, like the crimes one this afternoon that Angie is super excited to attend at 1. That one, and I know Patty's on that one too, and that one really is looking at juveniles. So their work will, you know, can impact our work, right? So if there's work on the juveniles, then that's going to impact, you know, stuff that we're thinking about. Which is
And
how we
one thing another thing I want to keep in mind, which I think may also impact the extension issue, but I don't think really as much, but we should at least keep in the back of our minds what the feds require, just so we can at least say to the legislature, you know, these other requirements. You know, I did do some research and I'll talk to the chairs about that as far as how that impacts the group's work as a whole. But you know, some of the changes over the years, both in the crimes and in the extensions and things, the sentences, somewhat have come from some of the federal requirements that we're not in compliance with. But I think we don't want to go too far backwards on it, I guess.
Yeah. Hey, Angie, can you talk a little bit more just on the federal requirements and when we say requirements, so correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there's federal requirements that are, they're basically, states need to do these things in order to get funding.
Correct.
And if they don't do these things, they don't get funding. And that
then they get penalized a certain amount of the funding, and then they have to ask for it back. And then if they get it back, and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, then they have to use it to come into compliance. And I got like I just don't have it handy right now, but I did get like some numbers and how it's impacted our state. Like, for example, last year when I spoke with the woman over at DOJ, the idea was, you know, that all states come into compliance, but because Minnesota had this separate notification law, it never really happened that we came into full compliance. From a registry standpoint, I think we're in substantial compliance, but like I said, my initial presentation, but there are, so yeah, it's a money thing, but I think it's something that the legislature, you know, should at least be aware of. So I'm not saying that it should necessarily change our recommendations, but I just think it's good to know if that's where some of this is coming from and how that might impact things.
Right. And I guess I just wanted to be clear that there are federal requirements for funding. And to the extent that we haven't been in compliance with the federal requirements, doesn't mean, I mean, it's, you know, we're a state, we're going to, you know, we are going to, you know, make decisions based on what we believe is good for the state. And the federal requirement piece is going to be it's going to be a money issue. And, you know, maybe it's helpful to know what the money, how much money, you know, so that I just don't want the discussion to be like, geez, if the federal requirement is X, well, we have to do that. And it's like, well, no, we don't have to do that. Just so
Right.
that we're clear. We get to decide, and then there's, and then we decide if we're comfortable with whatever monetary, consequence flows from that.
Yep.
I was just gonna jump in quick if I could too. I was thinking about the number. I think Katie had just mentioned, what was it, like 9,600 had completed the registration up to this point.
Yes.
And so that just kind of caught my attention that in 30 years since the registry has started, only 9,600 have completed. It was kind of a shocking number to me. And I know that's why we're doing what we're doing here, and trying to figure out what changes we can make and positive impact we can have. But it just kind of throwing that out there to kind of sank in for me, not knowing that number before.
Yeah, and if it's 9,600 in the history of the registry, the 30 years of the registry, I guess, do we have the number of registrants in the entire 30 history to compare that 9,600 to? Like, can we say, oh, X percentage of registrants have completed their registration requirements?
We can try and pull that up. I'm not gonna say that we're gonna be able to pull it right now. Oh, you can.
From that date again. 'Cause I'm just going back to an old PowerPoint.
Clearly, she's the guru here. I'm just the minion. Okay. And I should just note, all of these numbers are in the presentation that we gave. So it is posted online. Folks can refer to that as they choose. All of our presentations are posted on the webpage as reference, if folks choose to go back.
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't pull that number for the presentation though. So we will have to get back to folks about that.
And a number for our next, yeah, and not next by Monday. I can get it for the following. Our database guy is on vacation, so I can't access it right now. But that's of the 36,110 offenders, minus the 2,707 who were deleted. So out of the, whatever, someone can do the math, 36,110 minus, I don't know.
It's like round numbers, it's 34,000
Yeah,
in the history of the registry.
yep.
Is what?
She just said 34,000. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
More like closer to 33, because that's almost 3,000, Stacy, that were deleted at 27.
What was the number of deletions?
27 or 2,707, excuse me.
Oh, gotcha.
So 36,000 minus the 110. And of course, we had a few thousand people die, and that would have been before they completed. So they didn't have their times necessarily. We wouldn't want to count them towards it either. But then 9,664 were completed, excuse me.
So if we were to do really simple math, which is the only math I can do, we're looking at, I think we're looking at,
About a third.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and then deceased is about 2K, 2,000.
20, almost 2,300. Yep.
So.
And so, but we don't know if they died and finished or died on.
No, we wouldn't, again, we don't go, like if somebody's dead, we don't go back in and mark them complete. They'd be marked deceased. So they died while they were actively registering.
Oh, okay. So it would be active registrants or deceased.
But
At the time.
At that time, they're not counted toward, yeah. At the time that they died, we had them as active registrants.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Olivia, when you put together the statutory language, you're going to send that out, right? My understanding. If you could, just for everyone, I was going to say the lawyers and the non-lawyers, because I know that as a lawyer, I find the statute hard to read and understand. So I can't imagine, someone who doesn't have, kind of that legal background trying to make sense of this. Could you just format it in such a way that it's really clear, like this section is, I know it says in the statute, but just so that it's broken out by section, it just keeps, I think it from a visual and information organized way, it might be easier to consume.
So you're asking me to highlight headers and sections and just make sure that it's clearly denoted as to what
like
each section is for?
Yeah, you could take subdivision 6, for example, and just have that its own PDF and called, the registration period.
Okay.
And then there's the
I can
registration
subdivide it out.
requirements, and that's subdivision 4. Just so it's easier to keep, we'll all learn it, together, but it's just, I think it's easier to keep it organized.
Yes, I will separate, pull out, make sure that there is a division in things to make it a little bit more organized, a little cleaner. Yes. Representative O'Neill.
Thanks. So as we're talking about the collateral consequences with this, I know something that we also talked about possibly reforming the legislature is all the background checks. And I can't even recall when Superintendent Evans told me how many different types of background checks there were, but it was just a ridiculous number. And the reason I bring that up is because all kinds of different businesses do all kinds of different types of background checks. And my question is, how many of them I don't remember how many he said different types of background checks that were done. How many of them look for the predatory offender as part of a background check? Is it all of them? Do they pop up in every single background check, or is it just certain background checks that are run?
That might be something that's in the statutes too, with respect to the background checks. I'm willing to do a little bit of a survey and see what I can find as far as what the statutes require, and try to get that for our next meeting, if not our next one, the one after. Because I'm just kind of curious too, just in general. I know I've seen something that talks about the different ways registration impacts things, but wouldn't that depend on the background statute?
Yeah, so the majority of background study statutes will be spread and varied and will totally depend upon the entity doing it. So for example, PELSB could have different data pulled for them as opposed to DHS. MDH might get different data pulled as opposed to, any other entity. And so it totally depends on the entity. I will say that there are quite literally hundreds of statutes that do background checks for different purposes. And there is a limit to the data availability in terms of the registry. So there, as you'll see in the statute, there are only a couple of entities that have access to the registry. But in terms of background checks, that's literally hundreds, if not, there are literally hundreds of thousands of people being background checked per year. And so that is quite a large pull, I will say, Angie. You're going to hit a lot.
Oh, and yeah.
And they wouldn't necessarily
Not at all.
They wouldn't have access to POR at all. They would pull data that might have a flag, but they're still going to have the crime on their background check, regardless of the flag.
And
it does require a POR release form in order for any of that to be highlighted.
And is ran downstairs.
Yeah. So just know that that is not something that folks have ready access to by any means. Somebody needs to be willing to grant that. And not only that, but part of it is that unless the court documents are sealed or unless the charge is sealed, they're gonna pull and it's still gonna show on the criminal history as to whatever crime they were charged with, convicted of, et cetera.
Yeah, I just think it's a good point of conversation, whether they're pulling it from a criminal history or they're pulling it saying that they are on the registry. As we talk about collateral consequences. And I know that's another area of reform that Superintendent Evans and I have talked about, of reforming the background check as a whole, because there's just, like you said, hundreds of different information polls for different organizations and agencies and businesses and licensures and all, they all have different requirements of what they want to pull. It's very confusing, I know, for you.
Okay. Anything else?
Nothing here.
Okay, I will get the information out to folks as soon as I am able to gather it, including any testimony that I find as to the changes in 2014. And then we will plan on seeing you either in the next working groups as the day goes on, some of you. We're gonna have a really great bonding day, some of us. For those of you who have chosen not to go into the crime subgroup today, we will see you later on this week or next.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.